Let's listen to Kent Hovind's theories about the Ice Age and the geologic layers that can be found in many places around the world.
I'm going to give you the Hovind theory of what I think happened. This is not all original with me. Nothing's original with me. A 300-degree below zero ice meteor in spaces full of ice comets came flying through the solar system and began to break apart. As it broke apart, some of the fragments got caught and became the rings around other planets. Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune have rings around them, ice rings. We'll get into that in a minute. And some of the fragments hit the planets and caused craters like the moon, and some of the fragments hit the Earth and landed on the North and South Pole, freezing the mammoths.
That would be new matter coming from outer space.
Point 3. As it approached the Earth, it shattered in space. Super cold snow and ice rained down around the poles, mostly around the North and South Pole. Then this sudden dump of ice caused the Earth's crust to crack, which released the fountains of the deep. The rapid spreading of the ice caused all the Ice Age effects, carved out the Great Lakes, made all the drumlins and terminal moraines, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It buried the mammoths in super cold snow, 300 to 400 below zero, so they suffocated, standing up, and froze in 3 to 5 hours. It was so cold. It caused the Earth to wobble for the next few thousand years, and it made the canopy that used to protect the Earth collapse, because cold air hits warm air, rains, all the rain came down, the canopy's no longer up there. We're not protected like they were before the flood, and the Earth was completely covered by water. A 300-degree below zero Fahrenheit meteor, this is in my Hovind theory, came plowing through space and cratered the moon and the planets and made some rings around some of the other planets. Some planets have ice rings around them. As this ice, though, from the meteor comes in, it would tend to be deflected largely around the poles. As this animation shows here, ice meteor would break apart. Most of it would end up dumped on the poles. Why? Because of the magnetic field of the Earth.
What about the small meteors made of iron that fall on Earth today? Iron is affected by magnetic fields, but you don't see them fall exclusively on the poles, do you? But seriously, Kent, an ice meteor would not be affected in any way by the Earth's weak magnetic field. Neither would any ice.
That's going to tend to draw it mostly to the poles, not all of it, but some of it would hit everywhere. But a larger percentage would hit at the poles. This would end up with huge ice caps. Now, if we opened a hole in the ceiling here and started pouring in snow, it would start piling up. As the pile gets deeper and deeper and deeper, what happens to the edges? They start sliding out, right? I think that's where the Ice Age came in. The ice was sliding out from the stuff being piled on the poles. But these mammoths were probably chomping on their tropical flowers and it began to snow. They got running around trying to find a place to escape.
Reader's Digest. You used Reader's Digest as a source? There have been instances where mammoths have been found in a kneeling or sitting position, not standing up. The picture Kent is showing as an example, maybe of a standing mammoth, is the Berezovka Mammoth. You can read more about it via the links in the description.
But these mammoths were probably chomping on their tropical flowers and it began to snow. They got running around trying to find a place to escape this, brand new disaster. They'd never seen anything like this before. And some of them ended up trapped in snowdrifts, standing up. Snow buried them and suffocated them. You can suffocate in a hurry in a snowdrift. And they froze in a few hours. So, the Earth is totally covered by water. The cold spots on the North and South Pole, then, from this ice being dumped there, in my theory, would send out a cold wave. Like when you open the freezer, the cold air comes flowing out toward you. You can actually see the cold air flow out. The cold air moving off these polar ice caps would hit the warm air, causing it to rain. The canopy of water that used to protect them rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And all the sewers backed up, and everybody drowned. So this canopy is now gone, fell down at the time of the flood. So this ice meteor is coming in, breaks apart, fragments get dumped on the North and South Pole. That's why we have leaves there, that's why we have mammoths here, frozen, standing up, food in their stomach. Okay? The dump of ice on the Earth would cause the crust of the Earth to crack like an eggshell. This would release the fountains of the deep, and the ice would spread out, shoving out, dumping it here on the poles, pushing out toward the equator. Eventually it runs out of gas and stops. Glaciers would eventually stop, bulldozing ahead of it a pile of debris, which is going to become then a moraine once it melts back. The cold air made the canopy that used to protect the Earth collapse, rain down, 40 days, 40 nights of rain, fountains of the deep squirting water up through the cracks, and everybody drowned. Earth was completely covered by water. A 300-degree below zero ice meteor came flying toward the Earth and broke up in space. As it was breaking up, some of the fragments got caught and became the rings around the planets. They made the craters on the moon, the craters on some of the planets, and what was left over came down and splattered on top of the North and South Pole.
You heard it. New matter can come from outer space, and this matter made a thick layer of ice.
This super cold snow fell on the poles mostly, burying the mammoths standing up. The dump of ice on the North and South Pole cracked the crust of the Earth, releasing the fountains of the deep. The spreading ice caused the ice age effects, the glacier effects that we see. It buried the mammoths, made the Earth wobble around for a few thousand years. And it made the canopy collapse that used to protect the Earth and opened up the fountains of the deep.
Where does the ice age fit in? When was it? Well, let's see. They say ice ages began 2.4 million years ago and lasted until 11,000 years ago. Oh, really? Okay. At a height of recent glaciation, the ice grew more than 12,000 feet thick, 2 miles thick, as sheets spread across Canada, Scandinavia, Russia, and South America. Corresponding sea levels plunged more than 400 feet. See, if the ice caps are bigger, the sea levels are lower because the water is frozen at the North and South Pole. Bigger ice caps means smaller oceans, which means bigger continents. Maximum extent of the ice age, all the way down to Illinois, southern Illinois. Today's continental ice, boy, there's not near as much now. There's obvious evidence that the ice came all the way down to southern Illinois. No question about that. I grew up in Illinois. We went at school, would take trips, and we'd study the drumlins and the moraines and the lateral moraines and terminal moraines. And there's no question there was an ice age. And they have the isostatic rebound and the glacial grooves. Love all. I taught earth science for years. Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning, I think you're dead on target. The water under the crust of the Earth came shooting to the surface. That would, again, I think, shatter the canopy that used to be overhead. We covered that before. So this ice canopy would then be shattered by the fountains of the deep breaking open, and all the fountains of the deep were broken up. The water went shooting out and carrying rocks with it, ripping them off the edge of the crack. I think the debris and some of it got shot into space and ended up coming back, hitting the Earth or hitting the moon or drifting around in space, and it still hasn't hit anything.
You taught math and science for 15 years, Kent. Can you give us the numbers for how much energy would be required for a water fountain to shoot one boulder of the same size as a small house or a car into space? I will give you a hint. A lot.
The ice canopy was shattered and the water jetting high enough would freeze. All this ice was drawn to the poles by Earth's magnetic field and made rapid snowfall that buried the animals standing up and froze them in a few hours. During the flood, the entire Earth was covered with water, some liquid, some solid. And Earth's magnetic field would draw this shattered canopy fragments in and dump them on the North and South Pole. I think that's what happened. So we had an instant ice age. I think the ice age happened at the beginning of the flood. So I think the ice age comes at the beginning of the flood. So anyway, the fountains of the deep broke open. The water went shooting up to the top. I mentioned before, a cubic foot of rock, depending on what kind of rock, weighs about 160 pounds. 10 miles of that stacked up would weigh a whole bunch and put 30 tons per square inch on the water underneath. When it finally gets a crack to shoot out of, it would shoot, I think it would launch rocks into space. Certainly launch them up and shatter that canopy. At the beginning of Noah's flood, the ice canopy was shattered and snowed down on both poles, causing a rapid ice age, I believe, with sheets of ice sliding down all the way to southern Illinois. The layers all form quickly in one big flood. We shake this thing up, it makes many, many layers in minutes. Well, if the water's coming up 200 feet, where's all the water coming from to fill the bump? Sideways.
Moon's gravity is sucking it in at the same speed the Earth is turning from one direction. And at the equator, the Earth is turning 1,037 miles an hour, depending on your altitude. At the North Pole, it turns 0. So if the water's coming into that bump at hundreds of miles an hour, it's going to make layers forming sideways. I can shake this thing up and make 20 or 30 layers in a few minutes. You guys just don't get it. And I wish I could help you get it, but I don't know. Maybe you don't want to get it for some reason. All the layers formed in 1 year. With tidal pumping, the moon pulling the water up and down, it's also pulling it in and out. It would make thousands of layers in 1 year. Water going up and down is sucking in and out, making all these layers very, very rapidly.
So Kent agrees there was an ice age. He also says it happened rapidly. And of course, he says that all the layers proving the Earth is way much older than 6,000 years were made by the flood of Noah. Now, let's take a trip to a location very close to where I live and watch how Kent Hovind's own words contradict each other. Here we can see the same map of the Ice Age Kent showed. And this is the area we are going to, smack in the middle of the ice. Let us zoom in on this tiny island in the northernmost part of the Gulf of Bothnia. Do you see the lines on the southern part of the island? Let's go there and have a closer look, shall we? The ice was 3,000 meters, 9,842 feet thick. So it is impossible that all these layers were laid down by the flood if the ice age happened rapidly. Kent's theory is as wrong as it can be. How many layers can you count?
So we had an instant ice age. The layers all formed quickly in one big flood. So we had an instant ice age. The layers all formed quickly in one big flood. So we had an instant ice age. The layers all formed quickly in one big flood. So we had an instant ice age. There's no question. There was an ice age.
Kent, you just got whacked by a tiny, tiny island.